see here.
Okay. All righty. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to our chat. And just give me a second here. I got to fix something. Okay, there we go. So we are back again. Maybe this is your first time joining us. My name is Jody Williams, and I am the Indigenous Education Coordinator for Dufferin Peel Catholic District School Board, and we are delighted to be sharing this space today with Upper Grand District School Board. It's just a real treat and privilege to have with us here Joe, who will formally introduce himself to everyone listening in here. And before we get into that, I just want to mention that in the description box of the YouTube, you will, if you didn't notice, you may have to click on show more, the little description box in there. There's a form that if the teachers on behalf of the students would like to submit questions, we will we'll monitor those, and we'll try and, where it's a natural fit in the conversation with Joe here, to ask some of those questions, and we'll certainly leave a bit of time. And I apologize ahead of time if we don't get to all of your questions. We'll do our best, but I will now turn it over to Joe, who is going to, he'll introduce himself, and let's talk about the amazing world of plants.
Okay. Let's make sure my phone's off. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm Joe. I'm Nishnawbe Jibwe from Wikwemkong on Manitoulin Island. Everybody always just calls it Wiki. But so I got a bunch of real cool stuff I wanted to share. It's kind of funny the way everything happens. Just a real quick intro so you have an idea who I am. When I was in high school, I was real bad. I was real bad, and just towards the end of high school, that's finally when I sort of, finally realized that I have a culture, or that I come from like a certain type of people, like Jibwek or Nishnawbe, because I kind of didn't even really know. I was just in my own little bubble on the res, and then it wasn't until like later in high school that I realized that we have our own culture and language and all of this stuff. So I started exploring that, and started learning my language, and fasted and did all this real cool stuff. And my family was real proud of me because, like I said, all high school I was real bad, and then I started to become real good. Just learning about all kinds of cool stuff, culture, and engaging in it that way. And so I started to become really good. And then I met my wife. She was not my wife at the time, but I just took a summer job, and then that's where I met her, and she was real awesome. And then I kind of felt like, well, I'm not that awesome, so I have to be clever here. So like my family in Wiki, we all have big gardens. We all hunt and fish and trap, and we all know our language. And my family is awesome. Like I feel like I have the best family on the planet. And so I wanted to show my wife, or my girlfriend, like how awesome my family is. so that she doesn't just stay with me because of me. So she'll stay with me because my whole family. And but she's not native. She's not indigenous, and blonde hair, blue eyed woman started bringing her around, and my family was like, "Hey, who's this?" And had the idea, or were afraid that she might remove me from my culture. And my family just saw me from being real bad in high school, being real good with learning culture, and then maybe I'm gonna forget it all for this person. And so they didn't really like her, just straight up. And I was like, okay, I still want her to know how awesome my family is. So I started. I knew there's one member of my family. She would never say anything. She'd never. She'll always just give you a real solid hug. That was my grandma. And she still gives the best hugs. But started taking my wife or my girlfriend over to visit with my grandma, and I just wanted to just wanted my grandma to tell all the cool stories, like all of my favorite stories, so that my girlfriend is able to see how, it's kind of weird saying that, but my girlfriend is able to see how awesome we are. And when I was hanging out with my grandma, getting her to tell all these stories, I guess the craziest thing for me to understand is that my grandma never had a hospital or doctors when she was growing up. And then when she was raising a lot of her kids, like there was just no hospital. It was too far away. And then in the winter, the road gets closed because the snow drifts are too big. And so, like, if anybody got sick or injured, you have to know what kind of plants to use. And I always thought, like, man, what the heck? You have to use plants? That's crazy. Like, I can't imagine. We have doctors and surgery and all of this stuff. And here my grandma is always using plants. I just thought it was the craziest thing. Uh, so hanging out with my grandma all the time, talking about all kinds of crazy plants that she had to use for these sicknesses. Um, uh, me and my wife really quickly realized that we were not just hearing real awesome stories, but we were actually learning. And we were learning about different plants and medicine, and so we wanted to go out and find it. So me and my wife spent like, she might bust in here if she hears me, but like maybe like 4 or 5 years learning from her, and going out and finding all of these different medicines. And we go out and find all of these different plants. Then my grandma would tell me what they're good for. And it's like every plant helps a certain part of your body. And so my grandma would just look at a plant and say, oh, that's for your kidneys, or that's for your lungs, or that's for your heart or your brain or whatever. And so she would just say, teach us what that medicine was good for. And it was super cool because people started to talk, so really small community. So everybody kind of was starting to realize, oh, Joe found this plant, and Joe and his wife found this medicine. So they would approach us and say, hey, can you give me some of that medicine? I heard you found some. These old people who are, have this chronic disease. And we would just give it to them. They asked for it. I'd give them these plants. And then like months later, we would see them. And like, say it was arthritis, like rheumatoid arthritis. These people had knuckles that can't even move, and they're knocking on my door and they're saying, can I have that medicine? And so we would give it to them. And then in a couple of months, they would come back, or I would see them in the community, like at the grocery store or something, and they'd be like, here, look. And then their hands are moving. They have no sign they ever had arthritis before. So we would be like, what? Like, these plants work? So it's just a really crazy idea. When we started giving medicine away to people, we saw that it was working. And then we really like ramped it up. We knew something was really special about plants and using them as medicine. And so we started giving them away to everybody. And then it really quickly, we went from being providing medicine to teaching people how to provide it for themselves, teaching people how to make their own medicine. And then, so yeah, I guess we started teaching, and still to this day, like even until this morning, continuously learning about medicine. And so yeah, I was actually thinking about what I wanted to be able to share with you guys yesterday. So there's a couple of real cool plants that we could kind of keep an eye out for. They're super, super common. Guaranteed you'll be able to see them, or guaranteed with no experience at all, you probably will recognize them from the photos, or you'll be able to see them later on or recognize them. So I wanted to be able to share with everybody hopefully two real cool plants, some of my favorite that I just can't stop thinking about. Okay, so let me
So Joe, while you're just getting that up, I just want to emphasize to everyone who's watching here that Indigenous knowledge systems, and in particular, the one that you're bringing forward with us today and sharing as Ojibwe, as part of the Anishinaabe Nation, these knowledge systems have been around for thousands of years. And I think there's a big, today we are so familiar with Shoppers Drug Mart or going to the pharmacy and getting a prescription that very quickly, and of course through colonization, that we've almost erased or and devalued the fact that everything that we need is provided for us right here. And so I think it's important that for those who are watching to really remember that Indigenous knowledge is very sophisticated, and the language as well, because I know, Joe, you're going to get into this. The language also holds the key to understanding the biology, the chemistry, and that pharmacological, is that even a word?
Yeah,
Information in terms of how we are in relationship with the world around us. And it's really important. That's one of the reasons why we're doing these sessions, is to really showcase people what is really, really important, and why Indigenous knowledge is so beneficial and important to learn about. So I see you've got one up here. Let's talk about this. What do we got?
Yeah. Okay. So that was a pretty sweet, solid little segue. Yeah. So this is what I want to be able to talk about, or be able to share with everybody. A really, really amazing idea, and you'll be able to get it. Everything that Jody was saying, just from what we'll share. So the names of plants are super cool. The common names are super awesome. The scientific taxonomy, or like the Latin name of this one, is Eutrochium purpureum, and that's just to help you make sure that you're identifying the plant properly. So that's why that whole system exists. But you'll see some really amazing things in the common name, and really amazing things in the Anishinaabe name, like Mesquagomesek is what we'll call this plant. The common name is Joe Pie Weed. Former common name was Queen of the Meadow. But this Joe Pie Weed, Mesquagomesek, we call it, Sque is blood. And Mesquagomesek, that word is describing that blood is being stopped from, it's not allowed to go where it's not supposed to be. That's kind of like what it means. So kind of weird to walk by a plant and be like, oh, hey, this plant is called stops blood from being where it's not supposed to be. And it's kind of funny sounding, but what that is, that action is describing as a hemorrhage. When you hemorrhage, like some people will have a giant artery, usually, one of the major arteries, and if the lining of that artery gets too thin, then the arterial wall will balloon out and create what's called an aneurysm. And there's so much pressure inside of your blood vessels, inside of your vascular system and your veins and everything, that aneurysm, or that big balloon of thin blood vessel wall, can pop. And when it pops, it bursts, and all the blood is pooling out into parts of your body where it's not supposed to be. So hemorrhaging happens a lot during pregnancy or during delivery, the delivery of a baby. Hemorrhaging is super, super common. And this is the plant that helps prevent the blood from being where it's not supposed to be. So this is the plant that stops hemorrhaging. And that's what the name of the plant is, because this process is super important, especially like within the historical context. This plant's ability to stop hemorrhaging is the most important in midwifery. So you think of just my grandma. That's only my grandma. And I'm only 30. So like, I'm not an old man that's talking about his grandma. Like this is like 60 years ago. And so when my grandma was growing up, her mom was a midwife, and all everybody had was midwives. There was no doctor, or you don't go and have kids at the hospital. Everybody just had their kids at home. And like and so their job was to help everybody to deliver those kids. And this is one of the medicines they would make at every childbirth. They would get the roots of this plant and make a really, really strong tea. And in between the contractions, that's when the woman would drink it, just to prevent hemorrhage from happening. And then I remember, because me and my wife spent so much time with my grandma, we were visiting with her once, and we were talking about that my wife was pregnant, and that we're gonna have the baby at home, a home birth with midwives. We thought she'd be real proud, like real happy, because she was a midwife. But she was like, "Yeah, you shouldn't do that," because we were supposed to have the kid at home in January, and she said there's gonna be a snowstorm. Like, she just knew everything is gonna go wrong on that day. So she said, "You shouldn't do that." But we were just chatting with her, convinced her, and then she got up and she grabbed me like by my clothes, and she said she had two rules throughout my wife's entire pregnancy: never let her lift anything that's heavier than a textbook. And when she goes into labor, you make that medicine with these roots, mescogome secoabo, that has to be there. And it was real cool, because we were like, okay, and we were visiting the midwives throughout my wife's pregnancy. We'd go visit every couple weeks and check in and stuff. And then I remember on the way leaving my midwife's house, we passed a big meadow of the mescogomesek, and my grandma just described it as it has a giant purple flower on top, and then there's like a bare stem, and then there's a joint, and all of the leaves come out of that one section, and then there's a bare stem, and then about 4 or 5 leaves come out of that section, and another bare stem, another section of leaves. And she said it's tall, like it can be like 8-10 feet tall, big flower. And you pick those roots and you clean them up and let them dry, and you grind it up, and you make tea with that when she goes into labor, and then that's what she has to drink. That will stop a hemorrhage from happening. And I remember being like a little bit, okay, still a little bit skeptical. We were learning about medicine, but I'm always super skeptical with everything. So I started visiting, and I heard, one of my buddies, his dad is a doctor, and I was chatting with him, and he's a local doctor at the Manitoulin Health Center. And so, he was like, I know I know we were talking about this plant, and he was like, I think I know what you're talking about, because there is uh, so many stories in the hospital between all of the different doctors of this tea for really severe hemorrhaging, and it helps. It seems to help a lot. So I got him to tell this one story that he remembers. There was a young couple. The woman delivered the baby, but started to hemorrhage. And it was such a bad hemorrhage. There was so much internal bleeding that, you know, the baby was born. The baby is okay, but she's going to die. She can't get in a helicopter and get flown to the regional hospital in time for a treatment. She's going to die. So the doctor said, you know, she has like minutes left, like 25 minutes is what he said, to the husband. You know, your baby is fine, but your wife is going to die in 25 minutes. And uh, the guy, the dad, the husband, just took off, walked away, walked out of the hospital. And the doctor was like, what a horrible husband. Like, he just couldn't wait the last 25 minutes of his wife's life. He just already left. Like, and then he was thinking, what a horrible guy. He doesn't even care. But he had a thermos inside of his car in the parking lot, and he came back in the hospital with this thermos, and his wife was already unconscious, and her mouth was just hanging open. So the doctor watched. He took a spoonful of that tea and just put it in her mouth anyways. And, you know, it dribbles down, but it was pooling inside of her mouth. And in like 5 minutes, she swallowed that tea. And then he put more in, and it pooled in, and she was unconsciously swallowing that. But there's some medicine that was being absorbed sublingually through her mouth that was already working with the hemorrhage. And she was keeping the blood in her body, you know, and so she was able to get the energy back. And within a couple hours, she was sitting up and she was drinking that tea. And then in the morning, they all left as a family. And the only reason why that doctor let that man give her medicine, give her plant medicine, is because that woman was going to die anyway. And he'll tell you any day of the week that, you know, that's the reason why he let him do that. Because a doctor is trained to not let that happen. You can't have two medicines that, you know, there might be, the patient might die if you're using plant medicine and Western medicine. So because we don't know what plants are doing, if somebody wants to use plant medicine, the doctor will have to withdraw treatment and the patient will die. And so it's a huge issue. Anyways, the doctor just, he just let the man give her that medicine anyways, because she was already taking her last breaths. She was already like pretty much dead. And then, but then in the morning they all left. So that doctor was like, what the heck? This is messed up. And so for the rest of this doctor's career, that was like one of his first weeks being a doctor in that hospital. And for the rest of his entire career, every time somebody comes in with a plant medicine, because of that experience, he gives them the benefit of the doubt and is like, okay, well, we'll closely monitor the situation. And I think there's something very valuable about these plant medicines because I've seen it. And throughout his career, there's been about a half a dozen experiences where this hemorrhage medicine was used, that he was able to see. And communicating with all of the other doctors that work at that hospital, they all have the same sort of experiences. And sometimes, like it was like violence, you know, like it was real crazy because their doctors are trying to not let them. You can't use that medicine. You can't use that tea. And then there's actually like security and fighting and police and all but the tea, you know, makes it to that patient, or they had already drank it, and then the man gets arrested because he did something illegal that he was not supposed to. Somebody gets taken away by the police, but then that patient recovers. And so all these doctors have these crazy stories of using medicine. These hemorrhage ones are one of my favorites because of how quick somebody dies from a hemorrhage, and how there was basically nothing that a doctor could do for severe hemorrhages. There's no drug that we could use until like maybe 5 years ago. There was finally a drug that pharmaceutical companies were able to discover, able to create, that stops hemorrhaging, and so you could give it in an IV and it stops the hemorrhaging, and so you don't have to get flown to a major hospital for like a procedure anymore. So pretty much like a little pill you could take that stops the hemorrhage. And that drug, that anti-hemorrhage drug that was created, is created like 6 or 7 years ago, but is available to everybody more recently, was created from the roots of this plant. There's chemicals in the root of this plant that stop the hemorrhage, and they were able to create a synthetic drug that pretty much does the same thing. And so it's just kind of funny that, all those doctors have these experiences of people using this type of tea and having that sort of that clash situation. And then years later, there's a drug that's created from the tea that all these guys were already having anyways. And so it's kind of like real funny the way all this happens. I had this ready when my wife went into labor, and thankfully we didn't even have to use it. We didn't give it to her prophylactically. We didn't give it to her to prevent the hemorrhage, but it was there in case there was one, because we had professionals there to monitor that anyways. When my daughter was born, that anti-hemorrhage medication wasn't available yet either. Anyways, so it's super cool, this plant, and how important it is for like a really severe injury, such as a hemorrhage. So when it comes to medicine, a lot of we're basically looking at sickness and injury, and the injury medicines are super, super cool. This one actually helps with more than one sort of injury. Like there is I wonder if I still have the picture in this reel. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, so check this out. The common name of this plant is called Joe Pie Weed. And Joe Pie was a Sioux Plains medicine person. And everybody in all of the, not Indigenous communities around the res where this Joe Pie guy lived, knew of Joe Pie. He was like everybody's doctor. And there was a outbreak, kind of like what we're dealing with now, but it was a lot more deadly, called typhus fever. And it was killing everybody. It was a really, really, really crazy epidemic. And it was very, very short-lived. But what would kill you is this fever. Your body would be so hot for so long, you'd have a stroke and your brain would cook like an egg and didn't work anymore. So you would die. Not necessarily the infection, the exaggerated fever. Your body would get way too hot and then you would die, basically. So just like with COVID, like it's not the actual virus that would kill you. It's your own immune system that ends up, it's just overactive. So not the same thing, but almost. But when you get a fever, the typhus fever would be so hot you would die. There was another type of fever. So just to explain how this works, it'll all make sense in a second. But there's a fever called a dengue fever. And mosquitoes transmit this virus, and you'll get this crazy fever that we will call dengue fever. I think it came from Africa, and it's in South America, Central America, in jungle places like that. People still get it all the time. But there's a nickname to that fever, and it's called breakbone fever. And the reason why it's called breakbone fever is because the fever makes your body feel, that's when you're sick, it hurts, like your skin hurts, everything hurts. This fever, dengue, from these mosquitoes, make your body feel like every single bone inside of your body is broken. And when you drink tea from this plant, it feels like you have the first couple sips, you will go from feeling like every single bone in your body is broken, and after the first couple of sips of tea, all of those bones get set back into place, and all of that pain is gone because the fever broke. So people will call this plant bone set. It has nothing to do with bones, but it has to do with this fever and how amazing this plant is at helping with the fever. It's also the most disgusting thing that will ever touch your face. But it helps a fever instantly. It's super, super cool. Fevers are important for the sickness process, but for these like typhoid and dengue, the fever is actually the problem. Anyways, this is the ultimate medicine to break a fever. If you drink this before you go to bed, like just a couple sips before you go to bed, you'll go through, like, you'll soak 3 pajamas. You'll have to change your pajamas 3 times that night because you'll be sweating so much. Change your sheets, change your bedding. You'll be in a puddle of water. It's really, really cool. This is the ultimate medicine to curing a fever. And this is a close cousin, is the Joe Pie Weed. I don't know if you could kind of see the similarities, but this one has a white flower on top, and the Joe Pie Weed has a purple flower on top. This is Eupatorium perfoliatum, and this is Eutrochium purpurea. They're very, very closely related, and also in their use. So you use the leaves. You use the leaves and the flowers of this plant for fevers. It's the best thing ever. The common name is called bone set, and because of what it does. This plant, though, is really hard to kind of grow. It's really hard to plant. It's really hard to help grow, and can easily over harvest it. So the genius of Joe Pye, this guy, the Sioux medicine man from the plains, was amazing, because he was looking at all of these people who were getting the typhus fever that was killing them, and he knows the fever medicine is going to be this. It's going to be the bone set. This is what they need, but it's hard to plant. It's hard to help this plant. It's hard to make sure that there's more go. It's hard to harvest it sustainably. So he told everybody, use the Joe Pie Weed, pick these roots. Joe Pie Weed is, well, at that time it was called Queen of the Meadow. Queen of the Meadow is so easy to plant. Like you could take thousands of seeds and spread them. And so there'd be thousands of Joe Pie Weed plants or Queen of the Meadow plants. And so he took the more sustainable plant and started to teach people, use this plant, use the roots. When you have typhus fever, use these roots, grind them up, make some tea, fever will be gone, everybody will be okay. So it was so effective. The first few people who used this medicine, the Joe Pie Weed roots, or the Queen of the Meadow roots, or whatever the heck they called it back then, they would use it, and it was so effective. They would start tell their neighbors, tell everybody at church or wherever they were seeing people, to say, hey, Joe Pye told me to use these roots for the typhus fever. And then, it's just like the telephone game. Eventually everybody started calling it Joe Pie Weed. This is the Joe Pie Weed. He told us to use it for the typhus fever. And this plant is largely responsible for stopping that epidemic of typhus fever. And so and it's just funny now, like the common name of this plant is called Joe Pie Weed, just because of that's what everybody started to call it. Joe Pye told us to get it. And so it's really fun looking at plant names and their role, the reason why they have that name, and the role that name plays in a pretty recent history. Like that was like the early 1800s, the typhoid epidemic, and this plant's role in helping to control that fever, kind of going right back to one guy and one plant, and that name still existing today. It's kind of fun idea. But think of every time that you have a fever, like this is one of those plants that I feel like should be in every home all the time. little jar of powdered roots that you can make a little cup of tea and to just snap out of a really painful fever. A really invaluable treatment for that really intense kind of sickness. So there's two really amazing roles that it has, for hemorrhaging. Of course, if there's a hemorrhage, you should have this plant. But we have that drug now that we could get at the pharmacy, and or that's used in the hospital, and everything will be okay there. But there's nothing in pharmacology. There's no pharmacological intervention that can break a fever. Something as simple as that. That hasn't been created yet. Tylenol and Advil that we use when we do have a fever are usually only able to bring a fever down 1 degree. And so you take somebody who has a 41.5 degree fever, like a teething baby, they'll have a Tylenol and they'll be at a 40.5 degree fever. So still, they will still be at risk for a febrile seizure, where your body will be so hot in the fever that you'll start to have seizures, and it's a really nasty kind of thing to have to watch. So there's no pharmacological intervention that a doctor can give you that will stop a fever, but this plant can. And the only reason why that happens is because the scientists haven't been able to do what this plant is able to do. It's kind of a funny idea to think about. So one other thing, and you guys, like everybody who's watching this now, this is going to be one of those things that like you're going to hope later that you remember. And like, okay, so I hope no one ever has to deal with this ever. But there's a cliche, and it's cliche for a reason, like it's true, that labor, child labor, is one of the most painful things that a human can ever endure. And this is probably true, but I've talked to, and this is just anecdote, but every woman that I've talked to who's had a natural birth, who's given birth naturally with no epidural or no anything like that, and had a gallstone attack, they would take the labor over the gallstone attack any day. And so this is really, really scary, because dudes can have everybody can have a gallstone attack. And if women that are saying, this is not just my anecdote either, but if women are saying that they would take labor over another gallstone attack, this is terrifying. And gallstone attacks and this issue is so, it's not incredibly common, but I'm like, oh, if this ever happens to me, I'm so scared. It's a fear of mine for sure. Like, my daughter doesn't like spiders, and man, if I ever have to deal with a gall, I had one of my friends. Okay, so this is the story. One of my friends, big guy, super strong. He has a homestead, like goats and chickens and gardens, and he's like a real rough kind of, like scars like he's been through, and he's like 35. He's like a big, strong, super awesome guy. Tons of kids, does nothing but work, and just tough. And like all of his tools are just giant metal things, and like nothing fancy. And he's really proud that the only time that he's ever been in a hospital, that he's ever needed a hospital, was when he was born. Has not been to the hospital in 35 years since he was born. He's so proud of this. And he needed help. Well, went and seen him. We were in the Bruce Peninsula, and then he had a gallstone attack. So we went over there, and this big, super strong man is like, he was crying, like just weeping, and he was in and out of consciousness. He was blacking out, and then he'd come back. And like when you watch on Facebook or whatever, those people on the roller coaster, and then they're just like screaming and then gone, screaming and then gone. This is what he was doing. And I was like, man, this guy is just gone. So we use these roots as well, this root tea for gallbladder medicine. So I said, maybe I can help, and I had prepared some, and I had like 2 liters. I had 2 liter mason jar, real bunch of tea. It was super strong. Went to his house, said, "Okay, here, start drinking this." And then he kept passing out, and then he'd wake up, and then he would drink it, and he had like half a cup. And then he just looked at me, and his eyes were so big, like they were gonna fall off his face. He was so, and I thought something was wrong, and he was like, "I felt it," and then he was like staring right through my face, and he was like, "I felt it." And I was like, "Felt what?" And he, because I thought, "Oh no, did I kill him?" But he was like, "I felt it." And he said it felt, when you have a gallbladder attack, the pain is so, you could feel it all in like once, you could feel the stone. And he said that he felt, what it felt like is this stone just turned into gravel or something, like it just got crushed, and then it's gone. He's like, he went from weeping in and out of conscious to absolutely no pain at all in an instant. And he felt the pain, the cause, the stone disintegrate. That's what the way he described it. Now, in maybe like 24 people that we've given this medicine to, all describe the same thing. Like, it is like magical. Half a cup of tea, like just starting to drink 1 cup, and the gallstone is gone. And so I'm super relieved in the experiences that we've had using this plant for gallbladders. And the way women who've delivered babies describe gallbladder pain, and like, it's the most frightening. I watched my wife throughout her labor, and whew, I'm super glad I know this medicine. So if you take anything, if you remember anything, this is going to be super cool, because there's nothing a doctor can do either. You got to pass the stone, so you just kind of got to work at it, and it can take weeks. Oh man, so like, this is super important, and it's super safe too. Like, I'm not gonna, it's not a dangerous plant. But anyways, this is super cool. This is super important for like from hemorrhaging to fevers to gallstone attacks. Like, this is an awesome plant that we should have, or that we should know and spend some time with, and it's actually really cool. The main reason why people get gallstone attacks, just if I could, because I'm so scared. I've done everything. I consider myself completely fluent in all of the literature on gallstone issues. So one of the main issues with the gallstones is it's a choline deficiency. Choline is a nutrient that you could only get from animal foods, like egg yolks and organ meats, or just red meat from ruminant animals. And so your liver will make gallstones that will dissolve the fat in your gallbladder, and so your liver will make the bile salts that are responsible for dissolving the fat in your gallbladder. And to get the stones from the liver to the gallbladder requires choline. And to get the bile salts into the gallbladder itself requires a signal from your pancreas. And so there's 2 issues here. People's pancreas sucks from diabetes and obesity and metabolic disease. So the bile salts don't get into the gallbladder. That's like the biggest problem, number 1. Or you're choline deficient. And you see this generally more often than not with vegetarians that avoid choline purposefully, that the salts aren't getting to the gallbladder. They might have the ability to get in because the pancreas is okay, because of the type of lifestyle that is associated with vegetarianism and things like that. So their pancreas is okay, but the salts aren't getting from the liver to the gallbladder. And so the fat will start to accumulate and precipitate and aggregate to make these stones. A gallstone is not a stone, it's a fat deposit, and it's just like such a hard chunk of cholesterol. It's like a rock, but it's actually squishy and tacky. If the doctor gives it to you, it's like squishy and tacky, like a little piece of clay, and like a really hard kind of clay. But anyways, I just kind of wanted to just give a little shout out to how important it is to stay metabolically healthy, to avoid things like diabetes and insulin resistance and obesity, and then as well to achieve the nutrition that our body is designed for, to be able to have the choline that we need to be able to create. So the gallbladder is working appropriately. So this never has to happen to anybody, but if it does, we have a medicine now that can help, that I think everybody should have. The other reason why I wanted to talk about this one is because when you know this medicine, it doesn't just help you. So you know how oh man, it's already 1:44. Okay, so I'm gonna start talking real fast. No mow May. Like, you don't mow your grass in May because of all the flowers and the dandelions and the food for the bees, and they need that. And so don't mow your lawn. Leave the flowers for the bees. I love this idea. I do it every year. I hate mowing my grass. That might be the major source of my motivation for no mow May. I just don't like mowing the lawn. Or sweeping. But technically, that's not the most important time for bees, because we have lots of spring ephemeral plants that come out in the spring, plants that come out in the summer, and plants that come out in the fall. But when the summer plants die, there is like almost a 4-week period, a whole month before those fall flowers begin. So there's a drought, a food famine for bees. That is the most important time. Spring, there's lots of other places to go. The blossoms on the trees come out, and maple blossoms feed like all of the bees. So like in the spring, it's nothing really to worry about. I still do it just because I don't like mowing the lawn. But the most important time is after the summer flowers die and before the fall flowers begin. There's no food for bees then, except for 2 main plants, the Joe Pie Weed and the Lobelia. Maybe some of you guys can already kind of see the Joe Pie Weed and almost recognize it. Some of us probably looking at this like, what the heck? I've never seen that before. So this is obviously way more common. So this is the most important food for bees, so much so that every nest that they make is preferentially underneath a patch of these. So they'll make their hive right. So like only wasps make their nests in trees, in the paper wasps, their nest hanging. Every other species of bee, their nest is in the ground. And all of the bees that are native to North America, native to the Great Lakes, they don't make honey like on Mowgli. Like no bee is going to make honey like that here. It's all of our bees make the tiniest amount of honey. Even bears, when bears eat the hive, they're not eating it for the honey. They're eating it for the larvae, the pupae, because there's no honey. So we don't make honey. Bees here don't make honey, but they do. They're still important pollinators, and they need nectar from the flowers. So this plant, it only blooms when there's no other flowers. It blooms in that famine, in that drought. When after the summer flowers end, Joe Pie Weed will bloom, and it'll end its bloom when all the fall flowers start, the asters and the goldenrods. And so it's the perfect place to put your nest if you're a bee, and they do. And so if you're like one of my friends, all of this climate change stuff that everybody's always talking about never really made sense to me, because like I could go for a walk and I could see deer, I could hear birds, I could see bugs, I could see lots of plants, and like I can't really see effects of climate change and species loss and things like that, or extinction of species, and until one of my buddies came over, and he has a garden, And he was like, come check this out. So I went to his house, and he had a tomato plant, and he said the tomatoes flowered, and then the flowers will turn into the tomatoes, right? After it's pollinated. But what happened this year was the plant flowered, the flowers died. So it made another set of flowers. Those flowers died. They're on their third set of flowers. And he said, I realized what happened. They're not getting pollinated because there's no bees here. On Manitoulin, he was like, there's no bees. And he was like, I need to know what to do, because he had no tomatoes that year. And I was like, what? Like, how can you not have bees? That's when I got freaked out, and I was like, hey man, this stuff's legit. Because my buddy's got no bees, his garden isn't working. And like, if your garden doesn't work and you don't have food, I was like, what? So I was thinking, because harvesting this plant, I want to say, is horrible for this reason, because the bees put their nest underneath this plant, and when there's no food, they'll crawl up the stem of this plant and they'll lie down on the top and then just drink this plant. Like, they'll just lie. It'd be like you just lying on a buffet table, because all of the food is there. And that's what it does for weeks, until all the fall flowers begin, and then they'll be able to have confidence in their ability to fly to all those other plants. So when you pick it, you'll get stung for sure. You're going to hit a beehive, and they're all going to rush out of there, and there will be venom, and there will be pain. But if you're a farmer and you need bees at your garden, put this plant in the ditch in your front yard. He's got my buddy to put all these seeds in front of his yard, planted a big patch of it, and all of the bees kind of moved in. And his yard is just vibrating. His garden is just vibrating with bees. The following year, he actually just transplanted a whole bunch. And so when you get bit, or when you get stung, it's kind of like it's kind of awesome. Because okay, so if I could just say super fast, this is like one of the most coolest things that I wanted to be able to share today. So it's important to understand your relationship with this plant and its importance for bees and spreading it around, and the uses that you can utilize it for like sickness and injury is incredible. But you know what? Okay, so there was a woman who, and this is going to sound like a fairy tale, but there's this old Nishnaba woman, didn't speak any English, but if you had arthritis, you could stop at her house and she would remove your arthritis, and instantly, and for like a year, you would have this, you'd be arthritis free for like a year, symptom free. And she was super famous. All of the physicians knew her, and everybody on Manitoulin knew her, and everybody would go to her house. You would just bring her like a little gift, some food or whatever. What she would do is take you to her backyard. She'd put her hand on top of a hole, bang on the ground, and grab a handful of wasps, or mud wasps, which are a type of bee, venom-containing bee, bring you inside the house and sting every one of your joints that had arthritis. Your hand would balloon up for like 2 weeks. But what happens when you have venom in your body from a bee, like this venom is going to be killing everything that it touches, destroying nerves, destroying muscle tissue, destroying everything in your body. Your immune system sees all of that venom. So you know what it does? It says, okay, this venom is going to destroy my body. I need to control this. And so what your body does is it sends their antioxidant enzymes that are created in your liver, like it's called glutathione and hemorrhaging and catalase and all of these different antioxidant enzymes. It'll create so much of these antioxidants, send them there, and they're just going to help clean up the damage that's happening. Your body will also see all of the venom coming into your body and create all of these anti-inflammatory, over 800 endogenous anti-inflammatory chemicals that your body can make, and it'll send them to where that venom is to deal with all of the inflammation and damage from the venom. But you will send too much antioxidants, and you will send too much anti-inflammatory processes to where the bee stung you, you send too much. So when the venom is gone and dealt with, what you're left with is too much antioxidants and too much anti-inflammatories. And so those continue the work. So if you're dealing with arthritis, an inflammatory disease driven by oxygen species or oxidative stress, so antioxidants remove oxidative stress. So if you're dealing with arthritis that's caused by oxidative stress and inflammation, when you get stung by a bee, your body has that exaggerated response. You're left with too much antioxidants, too much anti-inflammatories, and that access from the bee sting is going to be able to remove enough of the disease that you'll basically be symptom free for a year. But the bee injected a toxic poison into you, but just enough that there was actually a net positive effect where it actually started to heal the disease. So that's exactly the way. I hope that makes sense. It's the same thing with exercise. Like, stress is always an opportunity for growth. Like, when we stress out our muscles will get stronger. Stress out your cardiovascular system going for a run, you'll get stronger. If you get stung by a bee, you stress out your body with the bee, providing you're not allergic, you're going to get stronger from that bee sting. Medicine is the same. The medicine inside of this root, it's kind of interesting to think about this. It's a plant toxin. It's a poison that plant created to deter anything from touching it, anything from eating it, because a plant can't run away like a deer can. So it protects itself with chemicals, with poisons, with toxins. And we utilize these in a medicinal way, kind of in the same as exercise or the same as a bee sting. It's just a little bit of poison that we introduce into our body, and our body says, hey, whoa, what the heck? And that poison stresses out certain parts of our body. And so it's our own body reacting to the stress of the plant toxins, that it's an exaggerated response, just like the bee. And so it deals with the plant toxins really fast, but then all of that extra resource that it sent is going to be able to heal that tissue. And so every plant medicine is actually a plant poison. And just about every drug that we get from the doctor is a synthetic plant poison. But it's just enough so it does a good thing. And it's just kind of funny, even just like from a life perspective too, the role that and to see stress as an opportunity for growth, or to get stronger, and how we were always obsessed with that. Like, why are we so obsessed with exercise and fasting and going in cold water or the sauna or plant medicine? All of these things are destroying your body, but just a little bit, and then you get stronger. This whole process is called hormesis. It's really fun. But this is such a cool plant. There's so many things that we could learn from the one mesqualgomesek, this one plant, from the environment to hemorrhaging and history. And so I thought, man, like, we could just talk about this one little thing, and there's so many cool things. So kind of like the main thing that I wanted to do with this kind of presentation is to give you that opportunity to say, holy crap, man, this kid talked about this plant for an hour, and all of this, but like this summer, kind of like just gesture out over a meadow and just like, remember, I yelled about this plant for an hour, all these crazy things. In that meadow, there's going to be like 300 different species of plants that all have knowledge. And there are people that have been responsible for keeping that knowledge. And holy man, if you could tap into that, you'll never look over a meadow the same way again. It's a really amazing sort of perspective to have. And yeah, I guess I'm really thankful to be able to share this with everybody at you know, when we're at such a young, kind of like really plastic or malleable stage, to be able to have this kind of perspective now and for the rest of our lives to add value to the natural world and Indigenous knowledge kind of like everywhere that we go. It's super cool. But I took it right to 2 minutes. I wonder if was there any solid questions there?
Oh, there's so many questions, of course, which we don't have time to get into. But I think, you know, there's some questions. I'm going to try and paraphrase some of these questions that have come in. And, you know, certainly you've answered quite a few already just in your presentation. But I think, you know, what kind of how you brought it all together in the end here, and I hope the takeaway is that, you know, as we sit here in our homes, because we're in this global pandemic, which is a direct result of climate change, which has been brought on by our distorted beliefs and values, which is, you know, tied into this whole idea that, you know, for Indigenous peoples here, like we've been living in balance for thousands of years, deeply understanding through the language. This is why, you know, every chance I get, I want to really articulate the importance of everyone should be learning the language of this land. So in this case, Anishinaabe, because that language encodes the instructions of our relationship with everything here. And so, you know, I really feel like you've just in this one plant, Joe, you really, you know, I think summarized so beautifully and so importantly why we need to really critically think differently moving forward and reawaken to the fact that we have to go back to understanding our relationship with the natural world, and in this case we're talking about plants, and it's not just for our bodies are incredible. Our bodies are naturally designed to be responsive to our environment, and plants just kind of help us along in our responses to the environment, right? And hopefully the folks here, you know, lots of questions have come in around where do we go to get more information? Of course, right? Like I know that's a common one is, you know, heaps of questions around, oh, is there a plant for this? Is there a plant for that? Yes. And I'm just kind of scrolling here through, oh, you mentioned, I think, you know, this might be an easy one to answer. You talked about teas, but of course there's other ways to utilize plants. I don't know if that's a quick answer you want to provide.
Yeah, like most plants we drink tea, but some we burn and their medicinal potential is released only in the smoke, and then absorbed in your lungs, the massive surface area of your lungs that can cover an entire tennis court, that makes that medicine really available. And then sometimes you could cook the medicine in oil, and then you apply that oil topically. So if there's an issue with your skin, sometimes we make the tea and you just throw it right in the bathtub. You just soak in all of that medicinal tea bath. But yeah, smoking, tea, and oil are the most common sort of ways to extract the medicinal potential from a plant and utilize that.
So I think to just to kind of summarize, do you want to talk about where could people go to find more information about you, Joe, and your do you have something you can put up about your is it a blog site? It's a website. My dog is now going off here.
yeah, we have a Facebook page, Instagram, Creators Garden. Started TikTok.
Creators Garden. Sorry, just to make sure because everybody's watching, so they can't see. You popped in the chat box, but the people viewing can't see it.
Yeah.
So if you Google.
Yeah, Google, Facebook, Instagram, Creators Garden, Creators Garden. You'll be able to get us and find us and see us, and me and my daughter's little shenanigans all over the forest, and be able to get more. Yeah, YouTube, everything like that. Yeah.
Amazing. So I just want to a huge chimiigwech, which is, for those who don't know, is a big thank you for spending the time with us today and hopefully you'll be out there now looking at those plants a little bit differently and thinking differently and recognizing how important this knowledge is to start learning about. So I want to say thank you, miigwech, to those who are tuned in today to listen, and hopefully you will continue to participate in these events that we put forward through education. So stay safe, take care, enjoy where I am. We're having a beautiful day, so enjoy that day, and we'll see you on the next episode.